About 2 years ago, Forbes magazine published a story based on a study by the Reputation Institute. Now, I had never heard of the Reputation Institute. I won't make a joke about that, but they surveyed over 12,000 individuals around the world about their attitudes towards 56 large cities around the world. Based on a variety of factors, the survey ranked the results. It awarded Tokyo as the city with the highest reputation. Sydney was number 2 and Copenhagen number 3. Rome was down at number 7 and Paris was at 26. Many factors make up a city's reputation. Different people put different weight on different aspects. I looked up the 100 safest cities in the U.S. Pittsfield, Illinois, which is about 50 miles northeast of Quincy, was ranked at number 1 with a crime index of 0.9. The little town of Sturgeon, Missouri, which is was number 87 with a crime index of a whopping 7.8. From Tokyo, with a population of 14 million, down to tiny Pittsfield with 4,500 people, each of these cities was ranked and evaluated based on the recent past. As the sequence of events of a city grows, it attracts some people, and it sort of repels or unattracts or is not attractive to others. So people, when they make a decision of what jobs to take or where to move to, they weigh various factors. And some cities are off of people's lists, and some cities are on your list. Hardly anyone today builds a city first and then finds people to live there. An example might be, the one that comes to mind is Brasilia, which is the capital of Brazil. That city didn't exist prior to April 21st of 1960, and it was created out of the jungle, out of bare earth, and built from nothing in order to be the capital of Brazil. But these are rare cases. Cities have attributes that make them attractive or unattractive. Silicon Valley, which is really a collection of cities, attracts young, progressive, technology-oriented people. Florida and Arizona attract retirees. Jackson Hole, Wyoming, attracts wealthy people who build big, fancy Western houses out in the middle of nowhere, and so on. And Silicon Valley is now, though, a quite different place than it used to be, and some people are leaving and cashing out. I know one person in Columbia did. This is more true for LA or San Francisco than Silicon Valley. In fact, there are so many people leaving the big cities of California and moving to Texas that if you look up on the U-Haul webpage and price a move, it costs far more to rent a U-Haul truck from LA to Dallas than to go from Dallas to LA. But human nature is a timeless constant, and what's true today has always been true, really, for human history. In chapter 18 of Genesis, opens with Abraham sitting in the door of his tent in the heat of the day, and he sees 3 unexpected visitors in the distance. And as we read the account in Genesis 18, it becomes plain that the Lord and his 2 angels had 2 things to accomplish with their visit. One is in verse 10, when to tell Abraham that his wife become pregnant and have a son. And the other purpose was while they were in the area, to verify if the reputation of the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah was accurate. But notice what God says about Abraham in chapter 18, verse 19, that he would instruct his children and his household to do righteousness and justice, and that they would keep the way of the Lord. Lot's wife, on the other hand, as we saw, was punished for how she clung to the corrupt urban society of the city, even as the angels were physically urging them to leave before it was to be destroyed. There are a number of cities in the Bible where the reputation of the city is a part of the story about it. We can skip forward to some of the towns in the Gospels. There's one episode in Nazareth where the locals all but rejected Jesus. And this is shown in Matthew 13. Matthew 13, verse 58, and I'll just read 57 and 58. And they were offended by him. But Jesus said to them, "A prophet is not without honor except in his own hometown and in his own household." And verse 58, "And he did not perform many miracles in the place because of their unbelief." The Apostle Paul makes note of the reputation of several cities. He remarks the people from Crete had the reputation of being liars. In Acts 17:21 it says, quote, "Now all the Athenians and the foreigners who lived there would spend their time in nothing but telling and hearing something new." So that was their reputation. The book of Revelation makes note of a city whose reputation is so completely represents the world that it is used as a metaphor for spiritual corruption. And that's in Revelation 18, verse 2. Actually, this city is mentioned a number of times in Revelation. "The mighty angel took up a great stone like a millstone and cast it into the sea, saying, 'Thus with violence shall the great city of Babylon be thrown down, and shall be found no more.'" From Babel to Babylon, all these cities developed a reputation because of the people who lived there, the government that reflected the temperament and character and beliefs of these people, and all of this is after the fact. You know, first come the people, then come the reputation. The city is made known based on experience. So if we could turn to Genesis chapter 12, please. Genesis 12. "And Jehovah," this is from the modern King James, "and Jehovah said to Abram, 'Go out of your country and from your kindred and from your father's house into the land that I will show you.'" Now, Abraham, because he had a lot of cattle and sheep and so on, he was almost certainly living out somewhere away from a city, but it was in an area that was identifiable. "And I will make you a great nation, and I will bless you and make your name great, and you shall be a blessing. And I will bless those that bless you, and curse the ones who curse you. And in you shall all families of the earth be blessed." Now, if we go forward to Genesis 18, skipping over some really important events, but going forward to Genesis 18, verse 16, "And then the men arose from there and went forward to Sodom." This is when Abraham was sitting in his tent, and the Lord and two angels appeared to him. "And the men arose from there and looked towards Sodom. And Abraham was going to bring them along the way." So he was going to show hospitality and them for a while on their way. "And Jehovah asked to himself, he said to himself, 'Self, shall I hide from Abraham, the thing that I should do? And Abraham shall surely become a great nation and a mighty nation, and all the persons of the earth blessed to him.'" So he was thinking, I'll show respect to Abraham for what kind of person he is and what kind of position he's going to have by revealing to him and discussing this with him. "For I know him." I love that. "And I know him, and he will command his sons and his house after him, and they will keep the way of Jehovah to do justice and judgment, that Jehovah may bring upon Abraham that which he has promised or spoken of him. And Jehovah said, 'Because of the cry of Sodom and Gomorrah is great, and because their sin is so grievous, I will go down and see whether they have done altogether according to the cry of it, which has come to me. And if not, I will know.'" So I can only conclude from these several interactions, from these a cluster of verses here, that Abram, and then later Abraham, had a lot of interaction with God. God must have told him a lot more than was written here, because what we see in chapter 18 could not have come except the two people. These two had a very deep relationship based on values they mutually cherished. When Abram decided to obey God, when God originally appeared to him, and pick up stakes, and even today that is a figure of speech, pick up stakes. Well, Abram's house was anchored to the ground with stakes. He did pick up stakes and emigrate to the land that God was going to show him. It was a decision based on only the relationship that Abram had developed with God. This was before Ishmael and before the deeply meaningful cutting of the covenant in chapter 15. When Abram decided to sever his relationship, and I chose the word sever because what he did was literally to sever. He basically left the known world and went off somewhere else to the wilderness that God had shown him. When Abram decided to sever his relationship with everyone and everything he knew and obey God, it was based on God's promises alone. In the sales process, there is a pattern that salesmen frequently use called feature, advantage, and benefit, or FAB selling. You point out the most valuable feature of a product, you speak to the feature's strengths and to the advantage it brings to the buyer, and thus to the benefit of closing the deal. So it's FAB selling. But notice the structure of the 3 verses in Genesis chapter 12. When I saw this, I thought, wow. In verse 1, the feature is that Abram would be relocating to some yet to be revealed place. It's a new place, and it's going to be great. The advantage is that God would be able to build a great nation from him. The benefit would be tremendous blessing that would flow from his obedience and being able to separate him from people who oppose him. To his descendants, the benefit would flow, and then to all humanity. Who could say no? In Hebrews chapter 11, we realize that it was so easy to say no, that when Abram said yes to God's offer, it became for us, for all the church and for all of Christian history, it became an exemplary issue of faith that we should emulate. So if we could turn to chapter 11 of Hebrews, I'd like to start reading in verse 8. Hebrews chapter 11, verse 8. By faith, Abraham obeyed when he was called to go out of a place which he was afterward going to receive for an inheritance. And he went out, not knowing where he went. By faith, he lived in the land of promise as a stranger, dwelling in tents with Isaac and Jacob, the heirs of the same promise to him. For he looked for a city which has foundations, whose builder and maker is God. Now, I've worked with entrepreneurs for decades. I've been blessed to know some very innovative, capable people. They've created many businesses, many jobs, and in some cases a lot of wealth. I spent an hour on the phone this last week with one such person. Every single time, the reason that someone comes to me for help is that the idea they have really is amazingly real in their minds. So much so, it's tangible, it's so valuable, they seem compelled to want to make it a reality. You can hear it in their voice. You can see it in how they're willing to have significant personal dislocation in their lives to move this idea forward. Now imagine that you have some deep burning vision and drive, and you have the Creator God as your venture capitalist and your protector and blesser and healer. The vision of the future city was already a sufficiently tangible reality in Abram's life that he obeyed God. It was a city that already had a reputation that both Abram and God spoke of, based not on buildings, great scenery, mighty industry, or other physical attributes, but based solely on who would dwell there. In the case of the city of God, that city is the place of God's people, first and foremost. Any attributes about the city are nothing apart from who was to dwell there. And this is exactly what the author of the book of Hebrew tells us just a little later, starting in verse 12. And therefore, these were fathered by one man, and being as good as dead as the stars of heaven in number, and like the innumerable sand of the shore of the sea, these all died in faith, not having received the promises, but seeing it from a distance and welcoming them and residents of earth. Make clear they are seeking a homeland, and they remember that land from which they went out from, and they would have their opportunity to return. But now they aspire to a better land, that is, a heavenly one. Therefore, God is not ashamed of them to be called their God, for He has prepared for them a city. Now, we praise Abraham for his example of faith, looking forward to the city, this city. Let us not forget that God looks forward to this city too. And there's a section in Romans chapter 4 about Abraham's faith. In one of my Bibles, that section starts in verse 17, and it says, quote, "The promise realized through faith," unquote. The point I want to close with is made in verse 17, where God calls the things that do not exist as though they do exist. In God's mind, the city of God, wherein only righteousness dwells, is already so real, so tangible, so valuable, that He was willing to put His life at risk to make it come to pass. This is the vision we should all have as well, that all the problems we face in this life are as nothing compared to the glory of living in the city that Abraham saw afar off, a city that has the most excellent reputation of any city that ever existed, the city of our Creator, our Healer, our loving Savior, God.